all around. This particular painting is one that intrigues me tremendously, and I personally really, really like it. It is a later work into the 1970s, and it was not painted in LA, but definitely inspired by the pool paintings of David Hockney. It's called Portrait of an Artist, Pool with Two Figures. So there is a personal, biographical, you could say, interpretation of this work, which I'm not going to talk too much about because it has been disputed and it really doesn't make the point that I want to make. But suffice it to say that it's called Portrait of an Artist, right? So there's clearly some personal reference in there. But at any rate, this was actually painted in Nice a few years later, but it was inspired by a prior painting that Hockney had made. And it again, it continues with the subject matter of pools, which he had begun in the 1960s in Los Angeles. And well, it's very similar to the other and yet very different. It's much more naturalistic, right? There's if you compare, or I don't have them next to each other in the PowerPoint, but if you think about them next to each other, this one is far more naturalistic, right? It has all these visual references that are far more concrete. And it has still very much a kind of magazine print effect to it. The colors and the edges that are fairly well defined, and the shadows are simplified, etc., etc. But it's still definitely far more realistic, you could call it, or naturalistic. Whatever, whichever term you prefer. And interestingly enough, it shows two people in what appears to be, even if it's not in LA, it could definitely be a luxury setting, right? And we have the pool all alone, protruding out into the landscape. We would assume perhaps that there is a house closer to us that we're not seeing, right? Because we only see the pool. And inside the pool, there is a swimmer, and outside the pool, somebody comes. And what do you think is happening here? I know you can't answer this since this is a video, but I'll tell you what I think is happening, or perhaps what could be happening. There's this man who comes perhaps from outside, right? He's fully dressed. He seems to be, again, dressed in relatively, you know, casual attire, yet formal, right? Casual formal in the sense that he's wearing a jacket and long pants and shoes, right? So perhaps he's been working. I mean, he might have a really cool job that does not require him to wear a tie and a shirt, but nevertheless, it's formal clothing, right? I mean, he's well put together, and so he seems to just kind of walked in the scene, standing there, right? And there's this swimmer who has been swimming and who continues to swim and who perhaps has been swimming for a while, right? I mean, if you go into a pool, you usually stay for at least a few minutes. And so he seems to be swimming, and this person comes in and looks at him, right? And we would assume again that the swimmer obviously will actually have to come out of the water, otherwise he's going to drown. So there is a instantaneous moment here as well, right? This one is going to come out of the water, not come out entirely, but perhaps put his head up, and this one is going to say hello, right? But again, they clearly live in two very different worlds, or perhaps they live together, but they actually seem to be in very different psychological moments. One of them is fully attired, the other one is naked, or almost naked. Um, one of them clearly is outside the pool and is casting a shadow, it's noon, is again outside, and the other one is inside the pool, cool, fresh, in a personal space, right? Like when you're in a pool, sometimes you are in your own, no, it's your mind as well, which is also inside the pool, right? It's not just your body, you are in a very personal space in there. And so they live very isolated, right? they live in this very isolated world, and that contrasts incredibly with the advertisement of the period. If we look at these two 1960s ads, we see that pool life, right, like in the other photograph or photographs and ad that I showed you, um, the pool is always represented as a happy place where you meet people, where you're socializing. Yeah, here of course these are Coca-Cola ads, right? So there's also that level, but pools are associated with socialization. It's a kind of advertised happiness. It's noisy. It's sensual, in the sense that you get to meet people again wearing a bathing suit, and there are games, there's movement in the water. And what's happening here? This is again a completely different scene, in which we have this psychological distance between the characters, right? So, again, what we have perhaps is this reflection upon this again darker side of the 1960s, in which again we have this luxury, or at least this comfort of life, this way of life that is again rather hedonistic, right? But at the same time, the reality of that is that there's also this psychological distance between the characters, right? Between the two people that are interacting here. One works, one comes from outside, the other one stays, the other one is in the pool, and they are living the life, you could say, but then again, they are actually not living the life as it is advertised in the ads, right? So perhaps there again, there's that not sinister necessarily, but somewhat dark side to it. And then finally, one thing that is often discussed in relation to Hockney is his um, way to represent water, right? The water here, and in many other paintings, these are just close-ups and fragments of other paintings by Hockney in which he represents water in pools. And you can see again this advertising kind of look, right? This image, this print image look, the representation of the water, that is very schematic, that is very simplistic, that is again very much like advertising, right? But then again, the painting has a psychological depth if you think about it in that way. The water, the place where the swimmer is, looks like this ideal world. And how do we know that? Well, because the water is represented in this, again, ad like um, um, design. And then again, outside is this also idyllic life, but there is this again psychological distance between the characters, where again this perhaps advertised happiness and fun doesn't actually take place. All right. So that is Hockney, and that is the end of my lecture.